Diosa Morena, the moon kisses all the curves of you. Diosa Morena, brown shadows dance with every move. Diosa Morena.
Wow. I think I have lots of questions about this song and you, but I also think it's, for me, when listening to it, I had two very different grandmothers. And if we look at, or in my feeling, and we look at some of our ancestral teachings of the moon being broken, and how we are the moon, and though we feel broken, we're not. And I think for this, and both of my grandparents were morenas, even though one was actually named Albenita, which means, white beauty, and the other one had suffered a lot of trauma because she was morenita compared to her brothers and sisters. And yet, what I loved about hearing the music with it is, I think so much in working with people, and at the core of what I do, I hope, is to help people recognize their own healing. And you kind of have to go through the pain phase before you could get into the healing phase, where we really have to admit to ourselves and to our community and speak out loud of what those pains are. And unfortunately, for us morenitas, we're still, there's a spectrum in between white and black that we don't talk about in the center, because either you're not brown enough or you're not white enough, and we fall in that. And I think that so many people, I think there's a great line in Selena in the movie where, like, no soy de aquí ni allá, right? Like, we're not here for, or we're not there. And I think that's something that in working and being blessed to work with people who try to, like, inspire the morenita. And if I look at, for me personally, if we look at movements about justice and restorative justice, it's not about calling out who's done wrong. It's about empowering from within, right? Because as we've looked through history, in being brown was nothing that we could be, right? Everything about our culture, our language, everything, there was an attempt to shift. And now that we know differently, being brown in each of us resonates. It resonates different. And how do we allow ourselves, after being indoctrinated to thinking that brown isn't beautiful, and that beautiful is a different spectrum? And yet, I think what I loved about it is that the music really felt like a grandmother holding you, right? Because it is like that rocking, that soothing. And some of us, and not all of us, unfortunately, had a grandmother who could give you that unconditional love just by holding. And sometimes that, what I feel is, when you're talking even about that moon going into ever crevice, it is that healing moon. It's that motherly love, that wherever you are broken, women have a great gift of pulling that to each other to hold you in that brokenness. But I also think that besides it being like loving, is so many people yearn to be fully loved. And I think part of learning to be loved is learning to accept all of you. I had a great conversation, and you remember my prima Monica, and it was like, and it went around that, you know, we strive, but as women, we really have to remember, and especially women of color, that until you see beauty in you, then other people can't see that beauty. Like it's not because of, it's not only because of their bias or what they think is beautiful, but if we see something that's beautiful, then it radiates through us, right? If you're in my line of work, it's always been fascinating to me when somebody, they could be telling you their story and then they'll say one thing about themselves and their whole energy, they just like light up and you're like, wait a minute, what is that about? Or if they see something or you say something, and you know, it could be simple in my practice, like, are you ever, do you think you'll get married? And it either can set off trauma or set off like, you know, a romanticized version of what it is. Or it may just not resonate in anybody at all. And so as we choose the energy, and I think this song is just like, it's really saying that goddess, right? The goddess is the goddess in your brokenness that the moon brings to, but it also is in our curves and in our skin. And it comes in some ways, like brown comes from within too. It has to radiate through us in our culture. So, and I don't think very often in, I think in our faith and in our practice, I remember there's a lot of books that you see about diosas, right, in other cultures. And we don't acknowledge, like there's a lot of books even on like the Black Madonna, right? You go from like the Black Madonna to the Madonna in where, in our country where you grow up and it's only the white Madonna, right? Mm-hmm. And if we look at, and the thing about the Virgen de Guadalupe that stands behind me is that it was the Morenita, right? She looked like us and identified through us. And I think even when you're talking about your hips, it's like that divine light radiates through us. And if we even think about women holding their energy center around their hips and their belly, that radiates through us as well. So there's just, I think there's several levels of hearing it, and beautiful. You know, I think how do we inspire the next 7 generations that come after us to see themselves as beautiful and to see everybody? You know, it's like, sometimes I think we do, as especially now in our dialogue across the country, it's like, where do you sit being brown? Mm-hmm. Right? And instead of saying, where does the violence come in? And how do we heal the violence? And what does it look like? And a lot of times when, I remember my grandmother before her passing, she didn't understand, you know, why she was treated so differently because she was dark. And it was something that she never spoke about in her life. It's not to me or anybody that I remember, but it was something that haunted her, which is, I could see something like this song to somebody who's brown being like, wow, even if in my environment I can hear sacred voices and sacred healing voices that say, you know, your brown is beautiful. You know, I think that's the empowering part is, you know, Diosa Morena. You know, it's really saying you in all of your brownness are goddess. And I don't know, maybe it's just my perception, but in growing up, whether you call it Mexica, Latina, Chicana, whatever, you know, Hispanic, however a person needs to, there is a beauty there. And I remember my parents, when they were younger, you know, they would do the marcha or the brown beret, you know, and we don't talk about some of those issues of using brown as beauty. And we should. We owe it to our ancestors and elders, but we also owe it to the future generations that come after us. If maybe since they were younger, they could be proud of being brown. It might really change and make a difference. There was a quote that I saw that I hadn't seen before, and it may have been around, but maybe it just wasn't my time to notice. But it comes from that famous "Si se puede," only it's changed to "She se puede."
Ah, nice.
And that's that one little switch of a word is amazing. You know, you can do it with all of your glory of who you are and in all of your brownness, and that is okay.
Yes, thank you so much, Tonita. This is so special to hear. I loved that the first you were like the first thing that that this took you to was your grandma's, because I think on the surface this could sound like a love song, and
Absolutely.
it wasn't like a romantic love song. It was always more that like love of my ancestors, you know, and the women of my life that have influenced me and everything. So I love that.
And both are true, right? Because if we know, and it resonates me as that abuela goddess, the truth is in our healing as young brown beautiful people, many times we have not even allowed ourselves to be touched in a beautiful way. And so when we see it in that, even in a sexual connotation, which is okay, if that's part of our healing, what needs to be is saying, you know, how do I honor myself? And brown is one of those things. You know, it's I'm beauty in my brownness, right? Because whether it's weight, it's education, we have a lot of ways of diminishing our value. And this is one way of saying, you know, but if you touch me, or if I'm touched, or if I admire all my parts, which we should, then don't discredit the fact that part of my beauty is because I'm brown. You know, so I think it's interesting that you said that, Antonia, because if we hear it as, and I guess this is my question to you, if we hear it as what a lot of people equate, and I do, especially with my grandma Alvenita, of like unconditional love. Love me when I'm broken. You know, it's like there was no expectation, like you could do no wrong. Doesn't mean she didn't guide and discipline you, but it was through love. And it's kind of funny because I think in some ways, as we look into relationships and we look into people, is we actually want that type of love in our partner too.
Yes.
You know, it's a deep yearning that somebody can love you in that way unconditionally. And it's not in spite of the fact that you're brown, but it's just part of the package, and you honor it.
Yeah, and that makes me think of what you were talking about earlier about the brokenness. Like I want to be loved by romantic partners that can see that in me, see that brokenness and love me, and not, you know, not have to, I don't have to feel like I have to hide anything.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. My grandmother would always say, mejor sola y no mal acompañada. Right? And better alone instead of not being in bad company.
Right.
And that's so true. And I think if more of us held the standards of relationship in that deep, profound love, then we probably wouldn't end up in so many dysfunctional relationships.
Right.
Because it starts by valuing ourselves. And if we don't value ourselves, every single part of it, then somebody won't value us either.
Right.
But I'm super grateful for your song and your healing, and it's very much medicine.
Thank you so much, Tonita, and thank you for taking the time to talk with me about this.
Anytime. It's beautiful. I was having watched you perform live, and I look forward to the day to hear this live from you as well. There is that, which I was talking about, where you just radiate joy. And there's also I think what makes it so pulling at your heartstrings is because you come from your authentic voice. And that's is not only healing for you, but for others, because I think that's the biggest struggle, one of the biggest struggles most people have is, what does your authentic voice look like? And to be able to speak it without fear, or sing it in your case without fear. You know, but thank you. Lots of respect.
Thank you.
Seguir adelante. Move forward with your medicine.
Yes, thank you. I will.